We are just honestly so privileged that this team has come on a Thursday night to equip us, and we're super blessed. So I hope that you get encouraged to just take action to learn, and I'm so looking forward to what they have prepared for us tonight. So without further ado, I'd like to invite up Sergeant Murphy. Here we go.
Thank you very much. Well, like you said, my name is James Murphy. I'm a detective sergeant with the Suffolk County Police Department. That means that I supervise a small team of detectives. I've been on the job for 33 years, and I run the human trafficking investigation unit. And right up front, I'll tell you, it is the most rewarding unit I've ever been in, but at the same time, the most heartbreaking and disturbing unit I've ever been here. Let's see if this works today. Kara? All right. So we'll start off with what is human trafficking. And human trafficking has two components to it. It is sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And we're going to deal with mostly sex trafficking today. Maybe.
Do you need it?
All right. Was that me or you back?
It was you, actually.
Oh, okay. All right, so we're going to deal with sex trafficking today. And what we have is someone exerting control over a person for the purposes of pimping them for prostitution. The unlawful control is not only a gun to the head, and you're going to see that during the night. You may not be able to tell that there's force or coercion going on during the sex trafficking. It's not gender specific, but for the most part, we see the victims being mostly female. So I'm going to say girl a lot for victim, but that's not necessarily the case. We have a lot of boys that we've dealt with, as well as the trans community. The control of the person can be direct or can be indirect. Okay, so the control can be very subtle, and the victim doesn't always realize that they've been victimized. I'll give you an example. Interviewing a girl one time, we asked her if the pimp had been violent, and she said no. So we continued the interview, and then a couple minutes later, she mentions that he grabbed her by the throat, lifted her up off the ground, and slammed her into a wall. So we said, I thought you said he wasn't violent. She goes, well, that's not violent. You should have seen what she did to the other girls. So she doesn't even recognize that what's being done to her is violent because all of that has become normalized to her. These traffickers are, I put up manipulators, they are master manipulators. They are targeting a specific person to manipulate. I'll get into that. The victims have tough backgrounds, childhood trauma you'll hear about, and affection starvation. Okay. This is one of my favorite quotes. It's on all my emails, it's on my desk. It is what my unit lives with and strives for. The good news is that a victim of human trafficking does not have to remain a victim. And although it is very, very difficult to get them out of the lifestyle, to get them on a different path, it's not impossible. And we have success stories, and that drives us to continue that success with the next victim that we see. And so when I meet somebody in the community, or even if I'm at a barbecue, and I talk to family members and friends, when they find out what I do, The question that I most get, do we really have a problem with human trafficking in Suffolk County? Hey, why does Suffolk County have a human trafficking unit? So, I think in the next slide, I can just talk about one example. And I think you would understand and start coming to the realization that we do have a problem. You don't need 2 hours of me talking. You just need one of these examples to understand that we have a problem here in Suffolk County. We've been in most of the hotels and motels in Suffolk County. Every one of them has had sex trafficking at one time or another. Every one. The small roadside motels, the large hotel chains. We just indicted a man for burning 2 of his victims with a clothes iron. 16 times each. They weren't bound and they weren't tied. If they twitched, complained, or made a move, they were punched in the face. She said by the 16th one, she didn't feel the pain. That happened in a motel in Rockhampton. We arrested a trafficker trying to recruit a 12-year-old into prostitution. That was in a motel in Rockhampton. We rescued 4 women. They were in the back of a van, half-dressed, crying hysterical. So when we got them out, they told us that they hadn't eaten in 3 days. They were being punished for something one of them said. They didn't eat for 3 days. I don't eat for 3 hours, I start shaking. Can you imagine 3 days? That's torture. Now, we're not talking about prisoners of war. We're not talking about a third world country. This was right in Holbrook. This is in our backyard. That's pure torture. Rocky Point, we have a 47-year-old male. He is pimping girls out of his parents' basement. Over a few years, he had pimped 23 girls at one point or another. Rocky Point. It's a nice neighborhood, nice community. The neighbors didn't even know what was going on. With him, 7 of his girls that were attached to him have died. 6 of them from heroin overdoses. He pled guilty. He's doing 9.5 years in jail, which sounds like a lot of time. Those 7 victims, their family members will never see them again. 9.5 years is not enough for what he did to these girls. We have a trafficker here that we're investigating. He's branding his victims with tattoos. The tattoo says property of, and it's the pimp's nickname. It's 2022. And we have girls in your neighborhood walking around branded as if they're property of somebody else. Think about that. It's not the 1800s. It's not a third world country. It's Suffolk County, Long Island. We have girls that consider themselves somebody else's property. You don't need me to talk for 2 hours. This should be enough for you to say, wow, we have a problem, we don't even know about it, and it's in our backyard. So the original question was, do we really have a problem here in Suffolk County? I'm real fun at my barbecues I go to. All right, so March 5th, 2018 is a big day in Suffolk County Police Department. It's your name, because we created a human trafficking investigations unit. It never existed before. It was the first dedicated unit in New York State. We're extremely proud of that. We had a vision and we had goals. We knew there was a problem, and I give our administration a lot of credit, because when you have robberies or burglaries and you investigate them, you have crime stats. You have so many robberies, you have so many burglaries. There are no crime stats for sex trafficking. It's happening behind closed doors. So if we didn't form this unit, there's no stats for it. Nobody would know. So every case we make, every arrest we make, we're building crime stats for Suffolk County. It doesn't look good. My administration didn't care. They said, Jim, if we have one victim, that's one victim too many, go find them. I'm really, really proud of that, so should you. So we made a goal that was different than most goals in police departments. We wanted to ID the victims out here, and we actually wanted to be a part of their support system that they so desperately need. We weren't just looking to make cases. We weren't looking to just make arrests and send people to jail. We wanted to actually help. And we thought if we could pull them out of that lifestyle and get them on a better path, that there are less victims out there. Then the trafficking starts diminishing, if we could do that. We also wanted to make cases and ID these traffickers and put them behind bars. But first and foremost, and that remains the same today, is to try and get these victims on a better path. And we knew as a police department we couldn't do that alone. So as soon as we were formed, we sought out an advocacy group that would be able to help us. And EC Live is that advocacy group. They're available to us 24/7. We talk to them daily. They come to us wherever we are. Wherever we find a victim, wherever we're talking to a victim, they come to us and we start that relationship with them. We also formed SCADI, which is Suffolk County Anti-Trafficking Initiative. We have a website, scadili.org. That brings, how many do we have now, 35, 40? Member agencies are working together with the same goal in mind, and that's to fill gaps of need for our victims, or whether it's probation, access, church, other law enforcement agencies. So making that goal, identify our victims and be a part of the support system, really enabled us to grow. So that goal is really what has helped us. You have your hand up?
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead.
Question. I live out in Riverhead area, close to Timothy Hill's Children's Ranch, and by Little Flower as well. Awful lot of kids run away. Is this an area that traffickers go into to target these? Could be also men. There's a lot of runaway men as well, young men. You know, but women have been disappearing as well.
Yeah, it's not. I wouldn't say that we are recruiting or finding them in those locations. It's after they run away that they're not safe. So I wouldn't say the area or those homes, the group homes, they aren't necessarily not safe places. It's after they run away that they're unsafe. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. We also handle all of Suffolk. That's from the national border to the Montauk Lighthouse. So Riverhead would be our jurisdiction.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So prior to our unit, we had 2 convictions for sex trafficking in the history of Suffolk County. Since we were formed, we've arrested 80 people for sex trafficking related charges. That's me and 6 investigators. And that's it. I can honestly do it with 3 teams, and we'd be busy every day. The amount of work that we do each and every day, it's amazing that we're able to get through the day. So, as I alluded to before, sex trafficking is behind closed doors. It's all on the internet. We really don't see many streetwalkers anymore, like you saw in the movies or you saw in Times Square years ago. It's all on the internet. When Backpage was seized by the government, we had about 24 websites open up for sex ads. It's as easy as that. these victims, they take a picture of themselves or have a picture of themselves posted on these websites with the activity that they're willing to do and pretty much where they are and their contact. So the Johns or clients go on these websites and they text the girl and ask for a date. They find out exactly where they're located. They go to that location. They perform the act. They pay and they leave. We don't get 911 calls on this. People aren't making complaints. It's all behind closed doors. Now, what we do as a team is somebody started getting ahead of me. I guess I was pressing them while I was walking around. All right, so we monitor these websites that are up. We average each night 200 people advertising for sex in Suffolk every single night. The next one is the fake ad that we put up all the time. And that's to entice these Johns and clients to make a date with us. And in 5 hours, we have 100 people asking for dates. When I said that we're in almost every hotel and motel, do the numbers. 200 people are advertising and they're in motels and hotels. That's a whole Suffolk, that's laid out. And we have 100 responding to one ad. How many are responding to the 200? How many Johns and clients do we have that don't understand that they're not helping with college bills? They're not helping this girl save for a car. The money goes to drugs. The money goes to the pimp. The girls see nothing. My girls don't make a dime. Every dollar they earn goes to the pimp. The pimp gives them the hotel room. The pimp gives them food. The pimp gives them drugs. That's it. They don't see a dime. So these Johns aren't helping. They're hurting. So since we started, we have identified and interviewed over 400 victims that are in the lifestyle in Suffolk County. Again, that's 6 investigators have done these interviews. 95% of them born and raised here in Suffolk County. Wow. Okay, so I'm guessing you guys were thinking, wow, I wonder what country all these girls are coming from. Yeah, 95% of the ones that we've interviewed and dealt with are from Suffolk County. I just put a handful of their hometowns up here. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Smithtown, Apa, Sadie, Patchogue, Napago, Quebec. We've interviewed 400. If you tell me what school district you were in, if you tell me what school district your kids went to, I guarantee you I can find one of my victims that walked your hallways. No question about it, I guarantee you. All right, so this slide is really what made us make our goal of trying to help these victims, because it was so disturbing what we were getting when we were doing these interviews. Come on, Laura, what are you doing? All right. So while we're doing the interview, we're not just asking them what's going on with them now, we're asking them what has gone on with them. Why are they in the life? How did they get there? We want to answer these questions so we understand maybe how we can try to stop it or avoid it. 80% of our victims that we interviewed indicated they were sexually assaulted or raped in their own household before they were 12. So, I told you I've been on the job 33 years. I was a detective for a long time. I've done investigations. And when you do a rape investigation, That woman that was raped, that stays with her for the rest of her life. She never gets over the trauma and the violence. She may learn to live with it, but she never gets over it. I did an interview. Girl tells me that she was molested in her house between the ages of 8 and 11. She didn't tell me how many times. She gave me a time frame. It's 3 years. It's over 1,000 days. I didn't have the heart to ask her how many times. I walked out of that interview thinking, was it 5? Was it 10? Was it 50? How does a 12-year-old deal with being raped 50 times? In her own house, where it's supposed to be a safe place, where it's supposed to be love and support. Well, the love and support gets thrown out the window. So now you have a 12-year-old. I don't have any answers. I don't know. How do you even come close to dealing with it? Unfortunately, that trauma is what really makes them vulnerable to the traffickers. Now, let's do some numbers again. I told you 80% of the victims that we talked to were sexually molested or raped in their own household. I also told you 95% of our victims are from Suffolk County. You know what that means, right? All of these rapes and molestations that happen in the house are happening here in Suffolk. I gave you the hometowns, Smithtown, Hop, we have Rocky Point, West Stony Brook, Medford, Patchogue. They're happening in those households. It's happening in your neighborhood. It means it's happening with your classmates. And how many of us are aware that that's going on? It is definitely an issue. Most of the stuff that we deal with every day starts in the household. We as a community have to start recognizing what's going on with our children, because by the time they get to me, it is way too late. They have been failed by their own family, by their neighbors, by the school district, by CPS. By the time I'm interviewing them, they feel completely broken. It is a very hard road. Very difficult to get them on a better path by the time they meet me. We have to do so much better as a community. Recruitment. These victims are looking for what we all look for, love and attention. So we're humans. That's what we want. That's what we strive to get. And they're not getting it at home. These traffickers know this. Everything they do has a psychological component to it. And they're looking for these broken individuals. I interviewed a survivor of ours. She had been clean for a while, and I asked her to tell me about the very first day she met her trafficker. How did that happen? How did she get this grasp? So she goes on to tell me she's 15 years old. She's on a train. She's taking the train to a bus stop. She's going to take the bus to a mall. 15-year-old girl going to a mall. She says a guy gets on the train, sits across from her. She looks at me, she goes, Sarge, bad guy. I can tell right away. He was not good. And he's staring at her. He doesn't take his eyes off of her the entire ride. It's her stop. She gets up. She's walking off the train. He comes up behind her, grabs by the arm, and drags her back into the train. Looks at her and apologizes for staring. He says, I couldn't take my eyes off of you. You are so pretty. She looks at me, she goes, Sarge, I know I'm no prize. Nobody has ever called me pretty. Well, let's evaluate that one for a second. Nobody has ever called her pretty. Has anybody ever given her a compliment? Has anybody ever had a nice thing to say to this poor girl? So he gives her his Facebook contact and says, hit me up, and lets her go. So I looked at her, I said, and? She goes, no, I didn't contact him for 2 weeks. And then she did. I said, you knew he was a bad guy. Why? Why would you do that? She goes, Saj, call me perfect. That's all it took. That led to 3 years of torture, abuse, rapes, introduction to prostitution, introduction to drugs. She had never used drugs before. 3 years of pretty much terror. Now we look at that guy in the train. That was no accident. That was his recruitment. And it took him all of 6 minutes to wrap her in. And I'm sure he probably said it to 10 or 15 girls a day. Because he just needs one. Just one. Look at the money. Let's take a girl and let's let her work 5 days a week. We'll give her the weekend off. Granted, they don't get weekends off. They work 5 days a week and they service 5 guys a day. That's not a lot. We have a girl that we're surveilling last summer out in the Hamptons. She was taking care of 28 guys a day. So let's give her just 5 guys a day. And she does a full service, so it's $200 a guy. So that's $1,000 a day for 1 week. Give her a weekend off, she's making $5,000 a week. That's $20,000 a month. That is, I don't know, 240? 240? Yeah, 20,000 a month, it's got to be more like 240,000, right? About 240 a year. So now he has to pay for the hotel, he's got to pay for a little bit of food, and he's got to pay for the drugs. So let's wipe out 70,000. Still making $150,000 on her back. And all he had to say was, "You're so pretty." That's it. Sometimes recruitment is that easy. He is looking for the girl that feels broken. I have another survivor I talked to. I'll just get to this one real quick. I brought her down to a school district. The idea was she was going to meet with 2 counselors, and we were going to talk about her upbringing and what she went through in school. So maybe they can draft a report to give the other counselors and teachers to find out, maybe we can find some of these victims before the traffickers. So we sat down, we started talking, and she talked about how she was raped at 9 by her uncle who was living with them. And then at 13, she was raped by her mother's boyfriend. The mother was beyond pissed off at her. How you can be pissed off at the victim of the rape and not the rapist is beyond me. Especially when the victim of the rape is your 13-year-old daughter. So mom does what moms would do. She ran away with her boyfriend. She left this girl alone in the house. So now she's trying to understand how to open up a can of raviolis for breakfast and get to school and not let anybody know that she's in trouble. So she goes to school, she sits by herself at lunch, and another girl befriends her. And she opens up and tells her story. The friend says, "Let me talk to my mom. Maybe you can come home with me. Live with me, my mom, and my brother." Dream is coming true. She's going to have a family. So they agreed to take her in, and she moves in with them. And she said everything was great for the first 4 days. And then they're in the car. Mom is driving. She's in the front seat. Brother and sister in the back seat. They're going to a store. She turns around. Brother is kissing sister. They get home, and she finds out it's not brother, it's Penny. Mom is letting it go on because it's bringing money into the household. But it wasn't bringing enough. So she had to find somebody. And she found the broken girl in the lunchroom. She didn't have anybody to turn to. She didn't know where to go. She started selling rock. And she worked for Richie for about 3 or 4 years. And she says, Sarge, it was so bad, he left a hole in my soul. She says, I don't think I'll ever fill it. She said that when she went to school, besides sitting by herself, her hygiene was so bad, she couldn't stand the smell. I jumped in and I immediately thought that was from depression. And she laughed at me. She goes, Sarge, it's not depression. I didn't want these men that were having sex with me to be attracted to me. So she didn't shower. So she's at school, she's going to class. Not one teacher, not one counselor took her aside and asked her that all-important question. Are you okay? No. She says if one teacher grabbed her aside and asked her that, she said the floodgates would have opened. Son, I wonder, if that happened, what path would she have gone down? Would I never have met her because they were straightened it out? Maybe got that guy in trouble. I don't know. Something. How do we not reach out a helping hand and ask? When we do our talks at schools, I ask the students, if you see something like that, I'm not asking you to go over, but grab a guidance counselor. Say, I think something's wrong. Can you grab that person and ask them? Just ask them if they're okay. That's a big thing we do when we talk to these victims. That's our first question. Are you okay? Can we help you? It doesn't take that much. Yeah, I don't know where I left off. I wasn't going to go there. So, this book, just to show you that these pimps know what they're doing, and it's not an accident, and they're not just trying to make money. This is Pimpology. The author is Pimpin' Pen. This is the most requested book in jail. So the very first page tells you everything you need to know about the book. And that's all pimping is. Control. Mastering another. That's what they're learning to do. Mastering another. You're trying to understand that they want love and attention. And you give them a little love and attention. You tell them they're pretty. You buy them an iPhone, but you take their phone from them. Now they don't have any contacts. But you give them a nice gift. You bought them sneakers. You treated them nice for a little while. So I added this quote in here. This is from a poem, America's Daughters. It's a poem written by a survivor, and they do a nice video with survivors in it. You'll do anything to feel like his everything, and he promises you everything. And the things he convinces you to do, they don't seem that bad. If afterwards he shows you how much he loves you. And as long as your profits meet expectations, you will have what you've wanted your whole life. Love. That pretty much sums up what these girls are dealing with their pimps and what they believe and how they've been manipulated. The sex with them is about money. If we bring in money, our relationship is better. When we have sex, it's making love. Manipulation. Federal stats. 1% are in the prostitution lifestyle as a choice. 99% are doing it because they are forced or manipulated. So let's think about this. Told you before, we have 200 people a night posting in sex ads in Suffolk County. If this is accurate, that means 2 are doing it as a choice. 198 are not. And if that's the case, how many traffickers do we have in Suffolk County? Right? Now let's say this is not right. Let's say they're off. Let's quadruple it. All right, so we have 8 doing it because they want. And 192 because they're being forced to, or beaten, or tortured. One of the things that I strive for when I talk to community groups is to change perspective. I'm sure when you walked in, the word prostitute meant something different to everybody here. What I'm telling you is that they're not making a choice for themselves. Most of them have a very difficult childhood. They have multiple trauma. They're being tricked, they're being manipulated, they're being beaten. You have to have a little more empathy and a little understanding. You can't just look at them and say they're dirty. You can't look at them and say they're a drug addict. You can't look at them and say, oh, that's their choice. That's the choice they made. That's the path they're on. They haven't been making their own choice since they were 7 years old. Somebody else has been making that choice for them. Somebody else forced them on that path. That's why when we built this unit, the administration agreed and allowed me to handpick every investigator that comes in my office. There are no political phone calls. There's nobody else pushing buttons. We pick them because they're interviewers. They understand what the victims are going through. They come in with patience. They come in with empathy. One of my detectives just a few weeks ago had an interview with one of our girls. It was 10 hours. 10. Can you imagine sitting with somebody for 10 hours? Somebody that feels broken inside and is all over the place with their story. They took breaks, have something to drink, have some lunch, have some snacks, take a breather. But that 10 hours was because she wanted that. She wanted to be able to talk about it. It was making her feel better. There aren't many people that can do an interview for 10 hours. My guys can. That's why we pick. So I mentioned Ray Rodeo up in Rocky Point had 23 girls that he had picked out at one time or another, and that we've lost 7 of those. Since we started, we've lost 30 of our girls that we've tried to help one way or another. These are a few of them. Arlinda, Jody, Josie, Bree, Olivia, Jenna, Jessie, Jean, G, Melinda, Mary, Jamie, Dawn, Karen, Gabriella, Ariana, Shannon, Jess, Tori, Danielle, and Bailey. Not only do we try to help them, but some of them we get to know their families. I've done presentations and videos with some of their moms to try and get awareness. When I told you in the beginning, this is one of the most heartbreaking units I've ever been in. That's why. Average age they died, 27. Imagine if they got on a better path. How many people they could have influenced. And now how many people aren't going to be influenced because they didn't have an opportunity to do that? That's what life is about. It's about being positive and touching others in a positive manner and helping others. They got cut short. They're not able to do that. How many people are going to miss what they could have given them? It's just disgusting to me. So, most of them were overdoses. So I'm going to ask everybody here about overdoses. 2019, 2020, 2021, 3 years. It's 1,000 days. 1,000 days. How many people in Suffolk County, just Suffolk County, died of an overdose? 3 years, 1,000 days. I want you to think of a number. Think. What do you think that is? We read the newspaper. We see the news. We know how bad it is. How many died in Suffolk County? It's 906. 906 people died of overdoses in Suffolk County alone. Just Suffolk. Car accidents, 274. Triple the amount were overdoses. So, I ask you, if you didn't know we had a trafficking problem in Suffolk, and your guess wasn't even close to 900 on overdoses, why don't you know that? Why isn't that in the news all the time? Why aren't we outraged that this is happening in your backyard? Because I think you should be. Now, I'm going to make a prediction, and you're not going to like the prediction, but in 18 months, you're going to start seeing something, and you're going to remember being here, and you're going to wish we had the heroin problem back. Because the fentanyl coming across the southern border in the last 15 months is enough to kill every single American person. That's outrageous. Now, to give you an idea about fentanyl, morphine is a very powerful painkiller. It's used in a hospital setting. It's used for cancer and end-of-life comfort. It's made from the poppy plant. Heroin is made from the same poppy plant, but it is mixed with other chemicals, and it becomes 5 times stronger than morphine. Fentanyl is synthetic. It doesn't need a plant. It's made in the lab. It is a lot cheaper than morphine and heroin. Fentanyl is 100 times stronger than morphine. I want you to picture a grain of salt. A grain of salt, an average grain of salt weighs 26 milligrams. 2 milligrams of fentanyl will kill you. We had 6 cadets down in Florida overdose on fentanyl. 2 of them did not use the drug. 2 of them tried to save their friends by doing mouth to mouth. And they overdosed. This stuff is being brought across the border for one reason, and that's to be ingested. It is not being brought in to be mixed with plastic. It's not made for computer chips. It's made for a human to ingest it. If it is not seized and destroyed, it's going to be ingested. The amount of deaths that we're going to have in Suffolk County, if that fentanyl makes it across the country, you're going to wish we had this heroin problem. I guarantee you it's going to more than quadruple the number that I just gave you. You have to be aware of that. And so this is just a couple of cases that we worked on. This is Holsville. This is where we got the 4 girls out of the car that were half naked, and they hadn't eaten in 3 days. So this is on Nichols Road, right across from the Highland 16 movie theater. That led to a 5-month investigation, and we locked up 5 gang members that were involved in that, and other girls that we had uncovered through that few months. This is the terrible one at the roadway inn. That's on Betts Highway, Rockhampton. It's right down the road. This was a 12-year-old and a 17-year-old at a group home. You talked about they're at a group home. That place is supposed to be a safe haven until they run away. And they ran away. And they got picked up. And they went to the motel. What the 12-year-old didn't know was the 17-year-old's pimp is the one that picked them up. He had recruited her when she was 13. Guess what was happening? She was getting too old. He wants somebody younger. So he tells the 17-year-old, you gotta find somebody younger, and she did. She found the 12-year-old. Got her to the motel room and was starting to explain to her what prostitution was. She had no idea what he was talking about, but she knew it was really bad. She got up, stole a cell phone, went into a bathroom, locked the door, sat with her butt on the door and her feet against the toilet, and she made a phone call. She called a former foster mom. Now, I'm guessing this girl, this 12-year-old who was in a group home, probably didn't know or realize the support she has, but who's the first one she calls? A former foster mom. Do you know how much that mom must have instilled in her, that she was the first phone call? So she calls her and tells her, I'm being held against my will. I am in big, big trouble. Tells her she's at the roadway. Mom does the right thing. She calls the police. Police immediately dispatched to the Roadway Inn Hotel in Huntington. The wrong one. They get there, they go to management, they clear that hotel, they know there's nothing there. That's when they recognize that there's another roadway, and it's on Best Highway. By then, she's found in the bathroom with the phone. They pack up, they put her in the car. The pimp tells her, lay down and don't get up, you'll get hurt. And they start pulling away. First cop that responds sees that car pulling out. Now, all he knows is that there's a phone call that the 12-year-old is being held against her will in a room. What's the cop do? Does he stop the car and possibly give that pimp more time with her in a room? Or does he bypass the car and maybe miss her in the car? These are decisions we have to make every single day. Life and death. Really. He stopped the car.
Amen.
He told me he knew after 2 steps from his PD that he had the right car. Because he sees a tiny little hand reaching up, waving. So he guns everybody, gets everybody out of the car, calls his boss, and his boss calls us. So 3 o'clock in the morning, my whole team comes out, we hold like a crime scene, we do our interviews, and Newsom gets locked up. Because of our partnership with the federal government, the feds love this case. And they asked for it, and we took it from the state and we brought it to the feds. He was offered 20 years if he didn't go to trial. So you can imagine if he goes to trial, he's going to be airmailed just for that night. This is the house in Rocky Point. This trafficking was going on between 10:30 at night and 6 o'clock in the morning. That's because that's when the pimp's mom and dad went to bed. It's in the basement, there's no bathroom. They used a 5-gallon bucket to use as a bathroom in the basement. Like I said, that was 7 girls that we lost. That was connected to Ray. My detectives in the back, Joe Collins, worked on that case. Was that about 12 months, Joe?
A long time.
Yeah. There's Ray and his dungeon, as they called it. Neighbors had no idea this was going on. 23 girls. Now imagine how many guys were going in and out of that driveway and into that basement with nobody knowing what was going on in their neighborhood. We have to be more aware. We have to know that this can be happening. It's not just friends coming over.
Why did he only get 9.5 years?
That's a good question. It's our court system. And I can bring in more examples of shooters and guns, and they're not getting enough time.
We talk
Not
about
at all.
failure to these girls in the end. That's
The
the
one-
slap.
The one thing I'll tell you is that he pled. So he spared all my girls from testifying. He spared those girls from having to tell their story in court. So the 9.5, we kind of accept because of that. We have one that forced us to trial and forced my girls to go in and testify. He got 25 years. And he got 20 years parole after that because he forced my girls to testify. All of our times are not enough. They have to be taken out of society a lot longer than we are. So now that you know we have a problem, or you should understand that we have a problem here in Suffolk County, narcotic overdoses, with the prostitution, with the trafficking. Now that you have that knowledge, I implore you to go on our website, scattyli.org. We have forms on there with red flags, things to look for. Be knowledgeable about that. If you see something and it's an emergency, you call 911. If not, you call Crime Stoppers. Crime Stoppers can be anonymous, or you can give you contact. And what you could do is say, I saw Sergeant Murphy talk about human trafficking. He told me to call if I see something. Give them the description. They put that in the tip. And that tip comes to me within 3 or 4 minutes after you hang up. And every tip I get, I assign to an investigator. And you know what? If it's nothing, we close it out. I don't care. I'm never going to call you and say, oh, why'd you give me a call on this one? This was nonsense. We look into everything. Because all I need is that one. Because if we save one girl from one of those tips, it's worth all the work that we've done. I said that in the beginning. I say girls because it's easier just to say girls,
okay.
But we have boy victims. So, who's next? Betty? Betty's coming up. She is from ECLI. She is the co-founder, and I'll let her introduce herself further.
Hi everyone. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Okay. How are you guys doing? I'm checking in because that's a lot of content. Yeah. I hear the same presentation a lot of times and I still get teary-eyed, so I can imagine everyone else, and I do this work. So, everyone okay? Yeah, okay. So I'm going to talk more about the trauma piece. So my name is Fetty. Like confetti, fettuccine, or if you like rap music, Fetty Love. I'm not a fan. I'm just going to throw it out there. But I really address more the human suffering piece. And we really work more on the healing path of the young girls or the young boys or the women, the men that we encounter, because the reality of what Sarge said is true. Many of them have had complex trauma. And what complex trauma is, so you know, like, if I were to say anyone here, have they ever encountered a traumatic event, most hands would go up, right? But what I'm talking about is a series of an entire life full of traumatic events. And they could be the same traumatic event over and over again, like being sexually abused, or traumatic events that, vary. But what happens is that when trauma occurs over a lifetime, we call it compounded trauma, or complex PTSD. Who do you know suffers from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder? Soldiers, right? People coming back from war. I can tell you about 90% of our individuals, survivors coming out of this lifestyle are addressing post-traumatic stress disorder. They have literally come out of war. And that is the best way I can explain it. Because the reality is that for healing, it takes years. People are like, I'm going to do this work, and I'm going to help people. That's great. But I'm going to tell you right now, be in it forever. Yeah. Because once you make that connection with someone, never sever it. Ever. And I work with the women and young girls. I've known some of I call them kids because I grew up, literally grew up together. I started working with them when they were like 17. They're in like their mid-late 20s now. And they will forever be a part of my life. And that is something that many people don't understand when it comes to working with this. If it took 10, 15, 20 years for you to get broken, it takes you 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 years to heal. Right? How many people are on their own healing path and understand exactly what I'm talking about, It's like every day, right? Me too. I'm there with you. So, traumatic experience. Sandra Bloom is actually one of my favorite authors. So, if you ever want to pick up a book on trauma, she's my favorite. And she talks about a traumatic experience impacting the entire person, right? It's the way we think, the way we learn, the way we remember things, the way we feel about ourselves, the way we feel about other people, and the way that we make sense of the world. So remember how Star said that, like, after you've gone through so many traumatic events, we what? We normalize it, right? It becomes normal. It's one of the reasons why that survivor he had mentioned, who, when he asked the question, did you ever go through, a violent situation? She was like, yeah, that's not violent, right? Now, had you backtracked a little bit and asked her what it was like growing up in a home, I'm pretty sure she's probably going to say, you know what, yeah, mom's boyfriends would beat the crap out of her in front of me. And sometimes he would turn his violence towards me. So what I'm saying is that we normalize behaviors that we encounter most of our life. And that is how we actually process. That is a human behavior. It's extremely normal. There's nothing to be ashamed of. But the reality is that is very much part of being human. In order to survive, we have to normalize. And so when you look at someone and you don't understand why they're still staying in the situation or why they're not leaving, right? We hear that constantly. It's because of this. One of the things that people don't talk about when they talk about domestic violence or any other form of violence is that when you encounter it your entire life, it becomes a generational thing. So it's a learned behavior. So 9 out of 10, if you come out of a DV situation while you were a young kid, right? 9 out of 10, you're going to find someone who's either going to continue and perpetuate that same cycle of abuse, right? Or you're going to become an abuser. And that is statistically proven over and over again. We're going to talk about it that way. So we're going to talk about it that way. All right. Let me know if you guys need a break, because I know this is heavy content. Oh, I didn't do that. Did I do that? Oh, you did that. Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about adverse childhood experiences. Who here has heard of ACEs? Oh my goodness, that's it? Oh, okay. Google, guys, it is your friend. Google ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and they have done, amazing work around studies that talk about folks who have had adverse childhood experiences and how it affects you and your life in the future, right? Like quantitative-wise, right? They measure that. So what the ACEs study did was it compiled over a course of history, a course of years, they compiled the adverse experiences of a group of people and they studied them and followed them throughout the course of a few years. And what they were starting to see is that the more adverse childhood experiences you had while you were younger, the more issues you were going to have within your adulthood, right? So that means, and we're talking about only medically. So if you had more adverse childhood experiences, you were more likely to have diabetes, to have heart issues, to have be prone to heart attacks, to be more times likely to commit suicide or have mental health issues or depression and anxiety. So what they were seeing is that the more adverse childhood experiences, the more likely you were going to have issues within your adulthood, right? Or within your life and into your adulthood. These are some of the things that they measure. And you know what I love about the fact that people measure poverty as an adverse childhood experience? What does poverty, and I'm talking about extreme poverty, do? Anybody contextualize it? It's interesting. I once heard a meme, I read a meme that said, poverty is violence. I had to sit with that for a little bit. Because really think about what violence does, right? It threatens your well-being, right? Poverty is the same exact thing. When you don't know when your next meal is going to come from, when you don't know where you're going to lay your head, when you don't know who you can depend on and who you can't depend on because life is extremely unstable, your whole entire life becomes volatile and therefore violent. And people don't view it that way, but we are starting to have those conversations, which is really cool. So we talked a little bit about the long-term impacts, and you can see them here. I'm gonna get out of your way. You can see them here. So the childhood trauma, you are 2 times more likely to have depression, 3 times more likely to have anxiety disorders. You're starting to see that the long-term impacts is increases stress hormones, triggers, fight or flight. Right? It creates relationship problems, so on, and so on, and so on. Right? The cool thing about, well, it's not really cool, but it's one of those like really cool things once you learn about it, right? Because then you understand why people, like we say people are crazy, and we're like, oh my God, why is that person so crazy? And then we realize that like, they probably had a lot of adverse childhood experiences, and all of a sudden, the crazy becomes empathy, right?
Yeah.
So here's what happens when you go through a lot of trauma. So in a normal development, when you feel safe being raised in a home with stability and love, okay, what happens is typical development. So what happens is that your survival, you're not focused on your survival because you feel safe. You only focus on your survival when you feel extremely unsafe. Okay? So what happens is that then your self-regulation can come in. And remember, the people around you are teaching you how to self-regulate too. Why? Through love, empathy, compassion. The stability assists with that. When that does not exist, that's not happening. Then social and emotional, right? These are all the building blocks that you're going to get to finally get to normal cognition. And normal cognition can happen. In other words, your brain is developing properly because it feels safe to do so. So I'm going to give you an example. Let's say a big bear walks into this room. Okay, not walks, like slams into this room, right? Rawr, right? What's going to happen? So, what's going to happen? Who's going to run? Who's going to look for the exit? Who's going to try to fight the bear? I'm the dummy that would try to fight the bear. I swear to you, I'm not even kidding. I'm that person. Okay, but who would pass out? Who passes out when they get really scared? Anybody? Okay, so here's the thing. You don't actually know how you're going to react. Because your entire brain, except the reptilian brain, the one that tells you to freaking survive, everything else shuts down. Your whole entire brain shuts down. You do have no idea how you're going to react, and even worse, you can't control how you're going to react. So, you ever heard about a rape victim saying that they kind of almost had like an out-of-body experience where they were paralyzed and they couldn't move or speak? That's fight or flight, guys. There was nothing that that person could have done to control the circumstance that they were in, right? Because when your reptilian brain, the back of that very, very like back of the part of your brain, the very most primitive part of the brain that tells you to survive, when that thing is on, and those hormones are secreting, right, and your heart is pounding, and everything in you is just telling you to freaking survive that moment, whatever it is you're going through, you do not make conscious decisions. The rest of your brain shuts down. And that's really important to understand. Want to know why? Because if that bear that made your entire brain shut down, and your hormones are secreting so that you can do the fight or flight to survive, but that bear is constant in your life, guess what happens to your fight or flight? And guess what happens to your brain while it's developing through fight or flight? What happens to the rest of your brain? Is it developing properly? No, it's not. It's why when we meet people who have gone through a lot, and they're like in their 30s or 40s, but they still act like children, and you're just like, what's going on? That's what's going on. Empathy, guys. Empathy and love. Right? Because that will get them to where they need to be to heal. But what happens with those people who act that way? What do? How do we treat them?
Terribly.
Yeah, we like don't want to deal with them, right? We're just like, oh, this person again, right? And we usually discredit them, and we usually kind of just, don't want to deal with them. So my challenge to all of you is bring them closer. love them more.
Amen.
Because that's really what they need. Okay, so now we understand a little bit about the brain. And so developmental trauma, when you're going through a ton of trauma, what happens is that your entire life is focused on survival. So that means that every other building block to get to self-regulation and self-actualization, meaning like fulfillment within oneself and knowing who you are, never actually happens. It's why you become so vulnerable and so easily manipulated. Does that make sense? Okay, let me keep going. I wanted to show you these slides because they're like really powerful. So these were scans that were done for young kids who had endured either trauma or severe extreme neglect. People don't think that neglect is as bad as trauma, and I'm here to say it's probably worse. As human beings, we are programmed to do what? Be social, right? To be interdependent upon each other and need one another. It was so cool because I actually, when I was in my developmental classes like 100 years ago when I was going through my grad school, one of the things that I learned was that babies, their brain and their neurons are connecting more when you're talking to them, when you're holding them, when you're looking at them. So even from early evolution, right, we're seeing that we need to be connected, we need to be needed and loved, and we need to be dependent upon somebody. We need to feel connected, and if we don't, that's when the maladaptive behaviors start, right? So look at the extreme, the child who had a normal, right, more of a normal stability within the home, and a child who suffered extreme neglect. Look at this difference in the size of the brain. That's a huge difference. And that's just neglect. We're not even talking about abuse, just neglect. Now I also want you to see the healthy brain versus an abused brain. So someone who's been verbally, emotionally, maybe sexually abused, whatever the abuse looks like, look at what lights up and what doesn't. There's so many parts of the brain that are not even properly developing because of that. So when we think that people have a choice, like Sarge said, do they? Do I do what you do? Okay, you got this? Yes. Okay, thank you. All right, so let's talk about vulnerability. Who here has vulnerabilities? I should say every hand. Okay, we all have vulnerabilities, guys. It is like as simple as it is, right? We all, if we look at ourselves deeply enough, we all know we have some vulnerability, right? But what happens when you have gone through extreme trauma? Your vulnerabilities are increased by, I don't even know, probably like 1,000%, I'm gonna be honest with you, because everything you've ever craved, which was a human connection and love and being accepted and being taken care of and feeling safe, rises to the level that you would do whatever it takes to obtain it. And we don't understand that because luckily we've been loved and we feel connected and we have that sense of community and family. But when that does not exist, remember that we are biologically programmed to need it. And when we do not have it in our life, we are going to do whatever it takes to get it. And even worse, we're going to do whatever it takes to hold on to it. That is what I really want to get across today. Because it's really easy to say, you chose this life, or you wanted this, or else you wouldn't be doing it. And it's a very different conversation to have to say, I know that if your circumstances were different, this is not a decision you would have ever made. And to be the decision to be the decision that they can choose over what they're currently doing. And that, honestly, is what I've always strived to do. I've always tried to be the connection to that other person that they can choose me over whatever is harming them. Because when I make that connection with them, I don't expect anything in return. I just love them. That's it. That is the extent of what I do. And when they need me, I'm there. And when they ask for stuff, if I can make it happen, I will. And I'm open and I'm honest with them and I'm connecting with them and I'm hoping that I can become that trustworthy connection that they can constantly come back to and realize, oh, this is what a healthy relationship should look like. And do you know how long it takes me to remember that before they start to they click? Sometimes years. So lots of patience, guys. Lots and lots of patience. So vulnerability is one of these tricky situations that is where a lot of these traffickers get their access from. I remember I was reading an article where they did an interview with the trafficker, or a pin, whatever you want to call him. And the guy literally said, I can tell the girl who would do just about anything for a happy meal and a place to stay for the night. Because what was happening was many of them were picking up these girls who were running away after their local bus stops. Right? And it was, or at the train stations, which still happens, like Sarge, I mentioned. And they use the vulnerability as access to then take control. And remember, when you didn't have love, and you didn't have a family, and you didn't have a sense of belonging, and you didn't have folks who just, you felt like you were a part of something, right? You're going to look for it, and even if it's a lie, which most times it is, you're going to wholeheartedly, with every part of your being, try to hold on to it. So when many times when Sarge will, send me one of the survivors, the first thing that I never ever, it was a rookie mistake actually that I made when I first started doing this work. I told them that the guy that was controlling them and doing this bad stuff to them was the trafficker. Man, did I get cursed out. I got cursed out that day. Because they don't look at it that way. They look at somebody who feeds them, who's filling their need for love, right? Even if it's false. They're looking at someone who's clothing them and is putting a roof over their head. Who am I to tell her otherwise? I'm not. Not until I establish that relationship. Does that make sense? So that's the part that I play. And it sometimes takes, like I said, years. Oh, you can go to the next one. Thanks. Trauma bond is one of my favorite things to talk about. Because we talk a lot about addiction. And we talked about the heroin issue and all that other stuff. But we didn't really talk about another form of addiction, which is called trauma bond, which actually happens within the domestic violence, survivors, but also within the human trafficking survivors. And what happens is that, so remember how we talked about all those hormones secreting, like the brain kind of taking control? Okay, so what happens is that people actually get a high when they're in a relationship. When does the high happen in a relationship? Well, when does the high, what applies when you start dating your significant other, right? Like, what are they doing for you in those moments? All right, without too much detail. Really nice things, right? Taking you out, and taking you to your favorite place for dinner, and buying you jewelry, and just those kind of things, right? So what happens is that's called the honeymoon period. The honeymoon period is when everything is great, he's telling you he loves you, and everything's fantastic, he's buying you these clothes and this jewelry, and doing your hair, and taking you to the salon, and getting your nails done. That is called the honeymoon period. Those don't last. Because what then happens is what? The violence. Well, what happens is that these become intermittent. The love bombing, along with the abuse, becomes intermittent. So in other words, it's like a roller coaster. Right? And so you endure and hold tight, and I'm telling you this, you endure, you hold tight the abuse, because you know that honeymoon period is coming. And before you know it, you are so addicted to this human being that even if you wanted to, you couldn't leave it. And you know what our substance abuse facilities do not talk about? This. We call it codependency. Yeah, knows that. It's a trauma bond. And it is an addiction. And it can happen to both people. And so the best way to explain it, and I love so much how the Shahida Arabi person mentioned, was trauma bonding occurs when there is a power imbalance. In a relationship, intense emotional experience intermittent good and bad treatment, the presence of danger, and periods of intimacy, seduction, betrayal, or deception is often involved in creating a bond. Out of a need to survive the abuse, the victim forms an addictive attachment to his or her abuser, which may appear nonsensical to outsiders. Those who grew up in abusive homes are even more susceptible to becoming trauma bonded to dangerous individuals in adulthood. The trauma bond is so strong that on average victims of abuse attempt to leave their abuser about 7 times before they leave for good. So, anyone ever go out with like someone who's a little bit of a narcissist? How hard is it to leave that person? That's what's happening. It's exactly what's happening to you. So just to give you a little bit of context, right? Because I feel like everyone at some point is a narcissist. I feel like narcissism is like across the board thing with everybody now. Not to say that that's what I'm saying lightly. I'm just saying that. Okay, so trauma and brain development we talked about. We talked about how the brain functions. We talked about what happened. We talked about the hormones. We talked about all the physiological responses. And we talked about the behaviors, right? We know that when you are in fight or flight, how do you act? Do you act reasonably? With logic? Are you ready to talk things out when you have issues? No. You're ready to fight someone. Or run away, whatever, right? Or maybe you mess up. But what happens is that when people meet you aggressively, what do we do in turn? How do we meet aggression?
With aggression.
With aggression or with defensiveness, right? And does that ever help? Absolutely not. So one of the things that we talk about a lot is how to form those relationships and how to get people to feel safe with you. You have to be the safe place. And that means that you need to self-regulate your own emotions. When you're in a situation where someone is coming to you aggressively, and that is not an easy thing to do. It took me years of training. We can all learn together. So long-term outcomes of trauma are all of these things, which we talked about, and then ultimately also falling into the manipulation of possibly human trafficking. It's why we have to look at our young kids for the prevention piece and the intervention piece. We have to start to forge those relationships, those trusting bonds with the young people now, before they end up in the hands of the wrong person. And we have to start paying attention to those things. So that 13, 14, or 15-year-old that is just being a rebellious teenager, because everybody is at that age, those are the ones that you have to pull closer to you, right? Because they're the most susceptible. What happens? Well, anybody know a little bit about brain development? When does the brain stop developing fully? Oh, nice. 25. Good for you. Anybody else know that? Okay, if you knew that, Okay. So this is my favorite thing to teach because it's really interesting. So if you are 24 or 25, your brain fully develops, right? Anyone here ever look back when they were like 15 and 16 and were like, it was like, what? Yeah. We all had that moment, right? I had the last part of your brain to develop is the prefrontal cortex. And do you know what that does? It is your higher, what is it?
Emotion regulation,
Emotion regulation, logic, higher thinking, guys. It's why when we're 15 and 16 and someone tells us to take a skateboard down some stairs, we're like, yeah, right? And now at like 28 or 30, you're like, yeah, I'm not doing that, right? That's why. Because now the prefrontal cortex is like, oh, we don't think that's a good idea. But it's also what makes young people more vulnerable and more susceptible. Because us logically can see the danger, they can't. And we expect them to, but literally, they really can't. Because that part of the brain hasn't developed yet. Okay. Oh. Hit it. Oh, I think that's it for me. Any questions I gave you a lot of information. Yes.
Are you guys getting into the schools to help the kids beforehand?
I always get that question. So she asked if we get into the schools. Anybody here ever talk to the school districts? How easy is it to talk to school districts? Yeah. And I also want to know, like, if you go to the school board, they're like, hey, trafficking is happening in our community. What are they going to say to you? No, I agree. Listen, we try. Sorry, how long have you been doing this? How many school districts have allowed us in? Maybe like one. Yeah. So, we're actually in Russia. Yeah, we're in Russia. Oh, nice. Well, hello. What? Oh, okay. They're yelling at you right now. So I'm going to introduce Laura. She's one of the best humans I know in the entire world. No, she really is. So there are three people in this world that kind of give me like hope and like all feelings of like love and stuff. And Laura's one of them. So is Sarge. Sarge is one of them too. He doesn't know me. And so Laura is going to tell her story. I'm going to tell her for it. But when we met, it was in a very different place. And I've seen her grow and flourish and become like this amazing human. And I am just so excited that she's with us now. She's actually part of ECLI, which we hired her, maybe like a year ago at this point. But she also started the first ever Survivor Advisory Board for human trafficking. And I think it was like the first one to ever exist on the planet. So I'm just throwing that out there. It's a really big deal. So here's Laura. All right.
Hello everybody, how are you today? Thank you, Patty and Sarge. So my story really is a mess. According to ACEs, I should have cancer, be dying, and be a drug addict all at the same time. But I'm here today and I'm here to talk to everybody. So my mom had 10 children, 8 different baby fathers. My dad did 20 years in prison. I met him when I was 21. My dad was a pimp or a John, I don't know. He's 90 now. My mom has passed since at 61 years old. I always say that so you can see the age correlation, how young my mom was when she was dealing with these men. She had a lot of trauma in her life, passed down to all of us children, and I'm trying not to pass that to my son, who I had at 16 years old. And it was very rocky in the beginning, up until I didn't have to live in survival mode anymore. And the reason I didn't have to live in survival mode anymore was because of Access Church, ECLI, the Sarge, and all the work that they do. I was in prison, but I was feeling in Riverhead for 4 months, but I always think in prison. I feel like a girl, I think so. It was 4 months in Riverhead, but yeah, so I was there at the one-to-one vacation resort, Riverhead. And while in there, I met ECLI. Actually, me and Betty went to school together, and so she knew my family was a mess way before I probably did. Before being somebody on the outside. But my brother actually sold me when I was 12 years old for the first time. My brother was a crack dealer, and he was only about 17, and he sold me and my sister to one of his, I guess, people that was buying drugs. That's exactly what happened, actually. So, he told us how to escape that day, though. He's like, yeah, you're going to get by Carlton Avenue, and you're going to get by Church Street, but get by the laundry house, you're going to get out of the car, and you're going to run through the back in front of the laundry house, come out the back of the laundry house, go by Facebook. He told us the whole thing. And we listened, and we did it, right? Because my brother told me to do it, right? So my older brother, and he said, go do this, so I'm going to go do that. It was normal, because I always see trauma, I always see problems. We lived in chaos. I thought I still in chaos, by the way. That's how I can do 50 things in one day. And like get it done, because that's how I'm so used to living, you know? So freaking breathe. And I laid literally on the 5th floor, and I was like, I'm gonna be sick in about a couple hours because I was chiropractic for the last 7 years. I was like, I'm about to be sick, but I'm gonna get better at the end. So I'm gonna tough this one out. And that's exactly what I did. And as soon as UCLI came in, I met Stephanie Fitzgerald, and I met Ginger Howard, and started talking my craziness to Stephanie, telling her all my crazy conspiracy theories about everything, and she listened to me, and she was like, no, but you have facts, so this might be right. I was like, yeah, I know, right? It's crazy. But yeah, she made me feel that crazy, because all these things are going, all these emotions are coming, I'm out on drugs, and feeling all this stuff, and like, so that's what really helped me to begin my healing process and my journey for me to be here today. You know, I stuck it out with them. When I got out of jail, it was January, I was running for the class. We had it all planned out for me to go to this residence and this stuff. They let me out a few days early, so I was literally stuck with nowhere to go, not a dollar in my pocket in January, wearing for the class, walking out and napping, like, what the heck am I about to do right now, right? So I hopped the train, I did what I did best, I survived, right? So in that mode though, I didn't know where to go. I was living in a hotel before that. I had no money, I had nowhere to go. I ended up back in a crack house, right? 2 days later out of prison, I ended up, not prison. I ended up back in a crack house, right? So I was like, damn, I don't want to smoke crack. I know I definitely didn't want to do heroin. Fentanyl was out there. That's a whole monster. I don't want to die. You know, I think I want to live. Like, this is what's going on. Maybe I'll just smoke some of that crack. It sounded good at the time. But I knew if I smoked the crack, I could stay there. Like, if I smoke crack and hang out with this guy, I could stay here and have shelter. And that made complete rational sense to me, but it was totally not a good idea. But I did it anyway. So, the next day I'm in a wall on the floor crying, calling these rehabs. I called outreach women's residents, I called Ginger and Stephanie. I'm like, yo, I'm gonna die, and it's gonna be this weekend if I don't get the hell out of the street. Boy, I didn't start from. I'm so sorry. I cursed in the church. Guys, I'm sorry. Oh my God. That's cool. Alright, so I was like, if I don't get out of here, like, it's not going to be good. And I knew that I didn't want that life for the rest of my life. I knew that I didn't want to keep giving my son more checkboxes on that Easter study. I knew that I wanted to stop this generational curse, that cycle, and I had to do it. And so, as this church and UCLI and Lord support system. And that's when I realized I can do better, I can be better. And really, it's been upward from there. But they got me a bed to sleep on, so I didn't have to, when I got my first place after the rehab, so I didn't have to worry about where I was going to sleep before I would go to work. It helped me get into this apartment, because if you're always in survival mode, you can't heal, you can't think about anything else. All you're going to think about, like I did my entire life, is how was I going to eat? How was my 6 little brothers and sisters under me going to eat? What? Who's got to get dressed for school? Who's going to do their homework? All these things that I was constantly in that mode finally started to, relax me. And I was like, okay, this is good, My son, he's talking to me again. He's super supportive of everything I do. He still, I even hired him for a brief time, and him and I work side to side together. And I just want the victims and other survivors to know that it doesn't have to last forever, and that's one of the things that our board does, besides getting out there, raising the awareness. We do offer trainings and stuff for different organizations and businesses, and I think me and Molly did the number, it was like almost about 3,000 people, because we've done like international symposiums and stuff that we have trained on human trafficking. And so I have Instagram. You can follow us at HCSA Long Island. And I think I'm done, guys. If anyone is listening.
Well, this is a little bit of a different, unexpected detour, but when I kind of was hearing about what was going to be talked about tonight, it reminded me of a song that I actually wrote when I was in college, or I just graduated college. And I had gone away to this conference, and this person shared this vision that the Lord had given him. And in this vision, he was in this auditorium, and in the auditorium, people were being sold. They were being dragged across the stage, and they were naked, and they were being sold. And he kept saying, like, Jesus, like, why am I here? I don't want to see this. I don't want to participate in this. Why am I here? And he clearly heard the Lord say to him, but who will do my bidding? Who's going to speak for me? Who's going to bid for these people for me? And when he shared this vision that he had, and that coupled with these stories that we've been hearing, the whole room was just like broken. And I remember falling on the ground, and I'm sobbing, and I'm just seeing pictures of these people who are being trafficked. Just like probably we were doing tonight as they're sharing these stories. And I'm like, God, this is my neighborhood. Like, these are people around the block. Like, how is this possible? And so the way I process is through song. And so on the flight back from this conference, it was a night flight, and immediately I just got this entire song. And so I'm writing it down on the plane with my little light on. And I came home and I recorded it. And I just felt that before we transition tonight into, the last segment, to just maybe use this as a time to reflect and digest and process what we've heard, because this song is based off this vision, and the whole first part paints a picture of the darkness so much like we've heard tonight. But the ending, the resolution, is what we can do. The things that we can do to help be the solution and to eradicate the problem. And for me, it's saying yes to Jesus, whether he takes me into places that are uncomfortable or out of, the ordinary, whether it's texting that number and reporting something or whatever it may be, that we would have that yes, and that we would be actively participating to eradicate this evil. So this song is called Free, and Anna, you might have to stop the beautiful background music that's happening. And then, we'll just share this. You've been killing it. So you have to probably go on iTunes to stop the things. I can't help you because I'm up here.
Yeah, let's give it up again for this team for coming out. Thank you.
Just bring it back there so Cardi should go get this thing. Okay, that's that.
There we go.
People brought alive. send me, Lord, send me, I will go into your will.
Thank you, Kirsten. That was beautiful. Fitting.
Yeah, that's good.
And next slide for me, if you don't mind. So I'm Kara. I'm the executive pastor at Access Church in Medford, and we have a community center in Port Jeff. And we got involved about late 2018 with Scatty. We were invited to be on the team with everybody. Can we just say thank you to our police department, to all the and the detectives? Sometimes we don't realize what they actually do. Sometimes we listen to what it says in the news and it's not all that.
Yeah.
It's a lot different. And the compassion and the heart that Sergeant Murphy and Lieutenant Lieutenant and their detectives and investigators have are unbelievable. ECLI, so that's the Empowerment Collaborative of Long Island, and they have merged with VIVES, maybe you've heard of them, the Domestic Violence Agency. They are now one organization, and Fetty and Jen are the directors there, co-directors there. They do a phenomenal job at loving people that are hurting. And then you have wonderful Laura, right? She's very excited tonight. But she's excited because her life's changed. So here we are now, what is our job? And my saying in all these things is know what your role is, first of all. But no one can do everything, everybody can do something.
Yeah.
Whatever you have, use it. So now I'm kind of addressing the church, and Kirsten brought us back into the focus of many of us in this room are church people. And so we have hope, we have a message, we have gifts and talents and abilities that God's given us that we need to use to help the hurting in our community. And so now our eyes have been opened to things that maybe we've never seen before. So now it's, what are we supposed to do with all this information, right? So the next slide says, what is the faith community's role? Well, leave the raids and the crime fighting to the professional law enforcement. It's not our job to go to the hotels. It's not our job to go onto the streets and to take people out of that lifestyle. Because we also heard from Fetty that they're not going to receive that.
Yeah.
They're not going to understand, because you're telling them, well, you're being abused, you're being trafficked, you're being hurt. They don't understand that yet. So let the law enforcement get the tips. Let them investigate, let them do the arresting, let them rescue these girls and boys and women and men from this lifestyle. What happens from there is they hand them to ECLI for the nurturing and the counseling and the groups and helping them get their social security cards and their identification and a job and transportation and housing. And guess what? From there, that's when we can help, and that's what we're going to talk about in a minute. I won't have you here too much longer. We also want to give it time for question and answer. So I'm going to move on. So know your role and do it well. As the church, we bring the hope and healing of Jesus through life-changing ministries, and what our role is, we have to know what that is and do it. And then pray. Everybody can pray for the abused, the trafficked, the victims, for our law enforcement and organizations that are doing this work on the front lines. Can we get that commitment from the church?
Yeah.
Okay, so the next slide, questions to consider. Just want to briefly go over this. But do our attitudes reflect that of Jesus toward the prostitute or criminal? We looked at that. Are we victim blaming? Are we saying, oh, they want to be in this lifestyle, or they're choosing this? No, we've been shown tonight that it's not the case, that they're not wanting to be in this lifestyle. And so it's up to us to love people where they're at, not judge them, not look down on them. And it's also not our role to say, okay, so it's let me think of which neighborhood that might be that this is happening in. No, let me explain something to the church also. We were talking about trauma bonding, domestic violence, human trafficking victims, but what
your teenager that you don't quite understand? What about the kid in your own home, in your own church, in your own neighborhood, or maybe your teacher, or maybe you're the social worker, or somebody that you don't necessarily understand what that teenager is going through, or they think differently than you, or they're trying to figure themselves out, or they're trying to find themselves. And a lot of times in the church, we like to put them in this mold and say, you're supposed to be like this. You're not supposed to question your sexuality. You're not supposed to question your identity. You're not supposed to question anything. Guess what? They can question it. It's our job to love them exactly where they're at and help them have an example and teach them, yes. But we can't force them into anything, because you know what we're going to do? Force them right out into someone else's arms like a trafficker. Force them right out into someone who says, I accept you exactly how you are. Well, what is that going to do? We're going to be hurt, they're going to be hurt, and they're not going to understand, and they're going to go into this lifestyle because we push them away by not loving them exactly where they're at. So that's my challenge to us as parents and church people, that we love people exactly where they're at and don't judge them, and don't expect them to be in the mold we think they should fit into. Amen? Amen. All right, so is our compassion conditional? Is it based on how someone talks, dresses, behaves, or whether or not they accept our offer? If we say, hey, why don't you do this? I'm going to offer you, I'm going to offer you help in this way. Well, I don't need your help. I don't want your help. Are we offended by that? Or do we offer the help and leave it there, and then maybe one day they'll come back and get it? Sometimes we judge people based on whether or not they receive what we're offering. And Freddie even said that. It takes years to build a relationship with people that have been hurt. It takes years. So remember that. All right, next slide. Jesus demonstrated compassion and forgiveness for everyone, including the prostituted women, including men who exploit them. Are we willing to extend the same grace to everyone? I just shared this, I think, Sunday. There's people that don't want to help anyone who's been justice involved. There's people that judge a prostitute or judge somebody. Is that our role? No. Our role is to love everybody exactly where they're at and figure out how we can help them in whatever way. So are we willing to extend grace to everyone, no matter what their situation is? Next slide. So through his love and liberating truth, Jesus can make anyone a new creation, transforming their identity into one with value as created by God. So our role is to know that, to understand that, to love people where they're at, and not force them into our way of thinking. All right, so practical ways for community to help trafficking victims. So volunteering your professional services. There's so many different ways to get involved. Let me just explain, I guess, a little bit about how we got involved as Access Church. Several years ago, it's 2018 or so, we were just, what do we do with human trafficking? We start to hear it in the news, we start to hear it in different missionary situations, mission situations. What do we do about this? So we contacted DAC at the time. He said, you have to meet with the human trafficking unit. And so we sat with Sergeant Murphy, we sat with Lieutenant Hassan, we had several ADAs in the room, and we're like, we just want to help. What do we do? Sergeant Murphy says, you got to meet the girls from ACLI. Within a week, we're meeting with Jen and Fetty, and it was like, we hit it off like this. So we're like, here's exactly what we're supposed to do. They're like, we need these hope totes. And they're like, we don't have the money for the things that we need. So a hope tote is when a girl comes out from the police department, goes to ECLI, they find them housing, or they put them in a hotel for a couple of nights, whatever the case may be. They have nothing. Absolutely nothing. They have no clothes. They have nothing that they can call their own. So a hope tote is giving them a couple of pajamas, sweats, a journal, nail polish, things that we take for granted that they don't have. So Freddie goes, we need hope totes. And we're like, okay, John, how many do you need? That's what the church can do. That's what the community can do. You know what Freddie did? She cried. Yeah. She cried because the police department can only do so much. ECLI can only do so much. They need the support from the community and from the churches and from the people that can help. And who are we? We want help. So some of us can give. Know your role and do it well, right? Some of us can give. Some of us can provide services. Some of us can do volunteer work, ECLI, all the different things that we can do. But we have to know what we're called to do and do it. but you have to know what's needed. And a hope tote, we put 25 or so together like this because the church is ready and willing and able to do stuff like that immediately. That's our role in loving our community. And we did. So that's some of the things as an example. So you have medical, legal, translation, counseling, dental, social work. If you are Spanish speaking and you want to volunteer some services, ECLI is in desperate need of Spanish speaking. So if you have any type of professional services, you can offer that voluntarily, once a week or once a month, however you want to work that out. Just be thinking about different ways that you can get involved. Learn the signs of abuse and trafficking and where to report. We talked about that, and I'm going to tell you specifically on your paperwork how to do that. Host an awareness seminar. So you're here, that's what this is. You have a school relationship, you have a medical professional relationship, you have a church, you have an organization. Contact us, and we'll do this in your organization so the word can get out. Did you get a lot of information tonight? A lot of great information that you can share. You can't remember it all, so host a seminar. We'll come and do that. Establish an aftercare wraparound ministry service for survivors. That's what we do in our church. So now, what happens is ECLI will now contact me and say, we have a survivor that now is getting an apartment. So that's what happened with Laura. So when she keeps saying that Access Church was helpful, what happened was, I think it was Ginger, sent us an email that said, we have a survivor getting an apartment, and they have this list of things that they need, and it's a long list. And they're like, anything you can do to help would be great. And I'm like, all right, let me find out. So I put this post out, and I emailed a few people. Within a week, we had everything brand new for Laura. From a couch to a bed, to a mop, to cleaning products, right? And it's not about Access Church, it's about getting the word out for the need, and you saying, I can do it, I can do it, I can do it. And look at the blessing that was to Laura, that 2 years later she's still talking, a year and a half later, whatever it is. She's still talking about it because it meant so much to her. That's our role. Again, not to go and take survivors off the street, victims off the street, to love them when it's our turn to love them, right? All right, so things like that. Transportation, housing, if you know of any type of housing organizations, if you have an apartment in your home, we need emergency housing. Someone comes off the street, they have absolutely nowhere to go. If ECLI knows that, hey, this person has an apartment in a house that they're willing to use for this situation, perfect. So just be thinking about the different ways that you could help in that way. All right, so the next slide. Resources. Practical needs such as furniture, clothing, gift cards, food, toiletries. These are the things we're talking about. Here's one that's kind of like I get on my soapbox about this. Work with established, reputable organizations that are doing the work. There are organizations out there that have the money to advertise and to sell you what they want you to think they're doing, but they're not really doing it. So I'm not just up here to say supporting ECLI because I love them. I know they're doing the work. And why would you want to help somebody possibly in another state, in another area, when you could support ECLI, who's working with all these victims we just talked about right in our own backyard in our county? So that's who we want to support. It doesn't mean you have to give millions, although you could. It doesn't mean you have to give like that. But it does mean if you hear that there's a need, fill it. Instead of saying, let me give $100 to this organization out of Utah, I'm not saying anybody in particular, that doesn't necessarily do the right thing with the funds. Do you know for sure that they're doing the right thing with the funds? So I just had to throw that in there. Just make sure that you know it's an organization that's doing the right thing with your money. All right, prevention. Coaching our kids through self-worth, acceptance, and unconditional love. I think as church leaders, those of you the church leaders here, we heard that today. As parents, we heard that today. We have to figure out how to do prevention type of things with our kids. Because what is it about? It's about love and acceptance and belonging. And how do our kids self-worth, right? Confidence. If they know who they are, then they're not going to say, oh, he said I'm pretty. It doesn't matter if you're confident. You're not going to worry about whether or not someone says you're pretty. He's not going to talk you into this if you have that foundation in your life. So what is your role in that? Mentorship programs like Long Island Youth Mentoring, and did you not hear the call for foster parenting? That story gets me every time, because this is a cycle. You have from foster care, runaways, there's a lot of youth that are homeless when they age out of foster care. They become victims to human trafficking. Then you have trafficking, then you have re-entry into the community, then you possibly have homelessness. So it's a cycle that just keeps happening. And so how are we going to get involved in stopping that cycle? If you feel a tug on your heart to foster because of the story that we heard, think about the impact that that foster mom made on that kid's life. That they called them when they were in the most severe, traumatic moment of their life, a desperate need of help. They called that foster mom. So if that's what you're called to do, know your role and do it well, you do that. You find out how to do it. You can ask me because I'm involved in doing that too. Contact your legislators, elected officials, community leaders, and tell them where you stand on issues such as bail reform, legalizing prostitution, RHA law, better prosecution, and help for the Johns. Those are all things that you can get involved in. The last slide, it's such an 80s, 90s term, isn't it? Slide. The next screen is faith community questions and resources to contact me. I'll have some cards as well, but you can email me at that number. The 800-220-TIPS. Make sure you utilize that in those moments that you see something. I had a guy from our church, after coming to our seminar, had driven down 112, saw something going on. He saw a guy and a girl got into some type of argument. It didn't look right. He called the tip line, and I think Sergeant Murphy got that call and figured out what was going on. Whether it materialized into anything or not, didn't matter. Why not say something and possibly save someone's life? So you got these handouts. One side is human trafficking indicators and red flags, and Sergeant Murphy alluded to the scattyli.org website. You can go on that as well. But you have on the bottom, emergency situation, call 911 immediately. If you suspect someone being forced into prostitution, call Crime Stoppers with 220-TIPS. And for more information, you can contact ECLI or myself. And the other side is all these different possible needs that you could fill. If you have any ideas, any thoughts, want to get involved, you email me or call me, and I will help you get involved in that way. So, on your way out, you're going to get the fancy handout, which is the Scatty flyer. It tells you more about that, what we do as Scatty. So, think about the fact, as Sergeant said, that 30-something, 30 to 40 organizations are collaborating for this issue. It must be important. You have Homeland Security, FBI, you have CPS and social services, you have organizations such as, I don't know if the Safe Center's on there, EAC and OMP. All different aspects of helping and resourcing each other are working together. The FBI, the Sheriff's Department, the Police Department, all working together. You don't always hear of this. It's pretty unique. And I'm the faith piece of SCAD. So I'm your connection to the SCAD as the church. So you have also, Suffolk County Trafficking information sheet. You just